Hello, and welcome to the 10th Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. The theme this year is Optimism Through Innovation. In this afternoon session, we will look at driving healthy economic and social outcomes through digital technology. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the land of the Jaja-Warung people of Jara country, where we are beaming from today. I'm sitting on the unceded land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, also known as Sydney. I would also like to pay my respect to the owners of the land who are the first scientists, technologists, and innovators who for thousands of years have been stewards of their culture and land. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Julie Trell, and I am currently the head of Muru-D, Telstra's accelerator program, and Human API, connector of people, programs, and ecosystems. Additionally, I am the CEO country lead for Australia and a founding space cadet, where ideas meet influence, with the mission to create a more ambitious Australia. We recognize and thank our contributing session partner, Telstra, for bringing this session to life. Now, to warm up our technology, I'd love to hear from you. On your screens, you should have an Ask button. Right now, type in your name and where you are joining us from, whether you are a kilometer away in central Bendigo or 10,000 kilometers away in the US. It will be great to see your names. And if you know the land on which you're on, please share that as well. And use your Ask button to ask questions right through our presentations. I'll do my best to make sure your voice is heard as part of the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. Today, we will open a panel discussion with some key innovators and inventors and my friends from across Australia. We have Lucinda Hartley from Neighbourlytics, Christy Mansfield from Seer Data and Analytics, and Michaela Jade, founder of Indigital. We will discuss how we drive healthy social and economic outcomes through digital technologies. We welcome our panelists, incredibly resilient, radically generous, and all addressing the Sustainable Development Goals in making the world a better place, which I'm sure you'll hear more of when they go through their presentation. So little introductions. Lucinda Hartley is the co-founder of Neighborlytics. She is an urban designer turned entrepreneur who uses big data to measure the quality of life and well-being of neighborhoods. She co-founded the social analytics platform, which has created data for more than 500 neighborhoods in over 10 countries and is influencing some of the world's most significant urban development decisions. Michaela Jade, CEO and co-founder of Indigital. She is a Cabrogal woman from the Darug-speaking nation in Sydney, but she comes to us today from Canberra. Her Indigenous technology company, Indigital, envisions a world where Indigenous peoples capitalize on our cultural intelligence, CQ, with digital intelligence, DQ, for sustainable communities. Indigital achieved this by ensuring Indigenous peoples have access to developing cutting-edge, safe, ethical, affordable, quality digital engagement that is appropriate to our social, cultural, environmental, and economic needs. Christy Mansfield is the co-founder and CEO of Seer Data and Analytics, a civic tech company making data accessible, usable, and shareable for decision-making in local communities. Named one of Australia's 100 Women of Influence in 2015 by the Australian Financial Review, Christy is a respected social innovator and thought leader on the future of data for good, customer experience, big data, and predictive analytics. All right, so the structure of the session today is each panelist will have time to share a little bit about their experience, tell some stories, provide some more background on their company, and then we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. The floor will then be open to questions that you may have in relation to your own business or experience. Please remember, this is the ideal time to learn as much as you can from Lucinda, Michaela, and Christy. So use the opportunity to ask your questions through the Ask function on your screen. So far we have Nicola on Gadigal and Wangal land, and we have another Julie from Sydney. So thank you for sharing, Julie and Nicola. Anyone else? So use that Ask button throughout the conversation. So we will start with Lucinda Hartley, who is the CEO of Neighborlytics. She is also one of the first companies that was selected to be part of the CEO portfolio. Now, Lucinda, before you go into your presentation, please let us know acknowledge the land that you are on and your superpower.
Thanks, Julie. I'm really excited to come to you today from Wurundjeri country in the Kulin Nation, otherwise known as Melbourne. And I'm going to be, as many of us are, talking today about place. And I always think that the fundamentals of place are a country, and it's a really great way to begin this today. My superpower is disruptive innovation and looking at different ways of applying technology to solve really tricky problems. All right. So thanks very much for having me today. It's really exciting to be here. I want to talk today a little bit about Neighbourlytics, but also particularly what we have been noticing during COVID. So Neighbourlytics is a data analytics company. We specialize in social analytics, particularly place-based social analytics that describe quality of life and well-being of places. So every day, as we're moving around, we leave behind millions of impressions about what we love and feel connected to through our smartphones and different digital accounts, which Neighbourlytics harnesses to understand community values, local business life, cultural activities, and a range of other things that make our neighbourhoods great. But there's been quite a lot of changes when it comes to our neighbourhoods lately. This is my local market just at the end of the street, which looks a little bit like this at the moment. And I'm sure we all have experiences of how COVID has completely transformed local neighbourhoods. In February, this same place looked a little bit like this, and there's been an 83% drop in its pedestrian volume. But we've also seen moments of resilience emerging in this time where cafe owners who are a cafe one day and within 48 hours have become a takeaway store and grocery delivery, and this extraordinary innovation and survival on many levels that we're seeing everywhere. And in many ways, this is this relocalization of cities and community that's emerging during this very significant, if not very challenging time. The challenge is understanding how neighbourhoods have changed in a time of massive uncertainty is really hard when it comes to using traditional methods. Perhaps we're used to doing surveys, focus groups, which might be harder, or even relying on census information, which is great for some questions, but when it comes to understand behaviour and lifestyle, it just isn't taken frequently enough to keep up with understanding those patterns and trends. So Neighbourlytics looks at meeting that challenge by looking at the different ways that we use and experience places, by the places that are there, the activities and events that go on, and what people say about them, to piece together this picture of social life and behaviour. What this kind of looks like in action, if you look at somewhere like Pyrmont in Sydney, is that we see the places, and what we will see is we'll see the park and the cafe, but we will also see the gig and the parents group and the soccer club and the startup and these other layers of information that make places great. We'll see activities and events and programs, because we know that neighbourhoods aren't static at one point in time, that they change day, night, weekday, weekend. And we'll also understand the stories and the values that people express when they're interacting with places based on what's popular, what's interacted with. So by taking this information in, we can start to understand the values of a neighbourhood. We work on a method known as social physics, which is pioneered by the MIT Human Dynamics Lab, which has found this kind of digital information, not personal data, but digital interactions, is up to 5 times more accurate when it comes to understanding behaviour than it is than demographic information. So I want to share some quick case studies of what we've observed looking at this data over the last 6 months, when there's been such radical shifts in the ways that our neighbourhoods are playing out, but also how all of our lives have changed in so many ways. And one of the really big questions that a lot of city makers and other decision makers are asking right now is what this really means for local economies, what this means for community resilience, and what do we actually need to thrive when it comes to planning for a post-pandemic environment. If we look from a Neighbourlytics perspective about what we've seen change in the last 6 months, there's really 2 key trends. One is that people are more local, and that's not just that they're working from home, but they're also spending most of their time within their local neighbourhood. But they're also more digital. And I don't just mean that we're spending time on webinars or Zoom calls, it's that we're actually interacting with our places digitally. We're ordering food locally. We are doing click and collect from a local library. And there's these different ways that by our places becoming both more local and new digital, that it's actually creating a new economic geography. And what's the principle that we would really love to see embodied here is that we actually start to look at this idea of a new local, this digitally enabled, locally connected place, but all within walking distance. Because we know one of the great pillars of well-being is being able to have everything that you need to support your mental and physical health within walking distance or within about 1 kilometre of your home. So if we just have a look at a couple of ways this is kind of played out. If we look at somewhere like the Sydney CBD, normally full of life and events, and that is starting to return on many levels, but just comparing January and April, it's like a 90% drop in the level of activity that we're seeing across the board, no matter all kinds of days of the week. But when it comes to understanding things like resilience, what we really want to be looking for is how diverse neighbourhoods are. Not just whether they have one job type or one industry type, but they're able to support many different opportunities for work, for social life, for connection in different ways. And just by looking at places like Moreland, which is a Melbourne suburb, or Parramatta, a Sydney suburb, we can see that the diversity of place offering based on their levels of activities and their opportunities to spend and stay is really different. Much more concentrated in Parramatta compared to distributed in Moreland. Now, in normal circumstances, this doesn't matter much, but when it comes to a pandemic, it can really affect our resilience. So if we look at the 5 kind of key themes, and I just want to touch on 2 of them to close today, around this idea of the new local, we've seen that there's particular differences in the way that we use public space, the hospitality industry, creative industries, attractions, including tourism and destinations, and wellbeing and beauty, including things like hairdressers and all these kinds of local employers. These are in-demand assets and at-risk industries which have been particularly vulnerable during COVID. But the thing to note is that they've been really vulnerable at a local level, that we might find that there's one street that's actually doing okay, perhaps it has enough diversity or levels of connection to survive and pivot through this time, when others are really struggling. And so our response also needs to be really nuanced in understanding the existing inequalities that COVID is exposing and the asymmetrical ways that it's really affecting our cities and neighbourhoods. Let's take a look at public spaces. And what the data has really revealed is that nature is the new attraction. It's no longer shopping centres or markets or other activities, but it's actually nature, not parks, which is the interesting thing for us to reveal, that people are really seeking out green space. Now, in places like Melbourne, parks and sporting facilities have actually been closed, but we've also seen a drop-off in Sydney and Brisbane as well. And what that means is people are really seeking out green space at this time. But only 49% of people in Melbourne actually have access to green space within their walking distance catchment. So we're starting to expose these kind of strategic principles that we need to think about with our recovery. We can see this in places like Sydney in our data come through, where we're seeing the level of engagement with nature increase over time, and also in other New South Wales suburbs. The other second point I want to look at just quickly is hospitality and dining destinations that are really vulnerable. Now, we've seen some local businesses that are really able to pivot and survive, such as the one on the left, and others, places such as Lygon Street in Carlton, which are more vulnerable. And one of the reasons they're more vulnerable is that they're mostly set up as a destination. All the types of shops are very similar offering, similar types of opening hours. And so if there's that kind of one pressure put on them, the whole street is likely to be more vulnerable, as places like Station Street are much more diverse in their outlook, but perhaps this particular cafe in the photo there is very, very digitally mature. They spent a lot of time investing in their digital presence before COVID that they're able to use in the way that they pivot and respond. And this shows up in Neighbourlytics when we look at like diversity profiles of neighbourhoods. So what does this mean for sort of emerging cities and post-COVID trends? Well, the main thing is that cities are extremely dynamic. Places are really dynamic. Now, this project was actually from 3 years ago, Elizabeth Street in Melbourne, closing the street down. But what we're seeing a lot right now is the complete transformation of our urban fabric to support new communities, new economic outcomes. And it happens really, really quickly, the changes that are happening over time. So we can use the digital data to actually quantify what our ROI is on these projects and understand the investment strategies that we would put forward, such as we looked at for this project in Melbourne a few years ago. And I think these kinds of ideas of, drawing from some of the technology principles about being agile and flexible and embedding them into place are really important for our pathway moving forward. So I'm really excited to be here today. I'm particularly excited to hear from Michaela and Christy, two amazing women that I admire, and look forward to having a discussion around innovation today. So thanks very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucinda. I love that nature is the new attraction. And I know that you're finding all this because data that you are collecting is gold, and data is very powerful. And data also tells stories, which is how I'm going to lead into the next speaker, Michaela, as a phenomenal storyteller. Again, my friend, CEO and founder of Indigital, and also in the second cohort of the CEO portfolio, as well as a phenomenal partner with Telstra Purple and Microsoft, doing a lot of work there. So Michaela, over to you. Where are you calling in from, and what is your superpower?
Thank you so much, Julie, and thanks, Lucinda. So I am calling in from Ngunnawal country and Ngambri country in Canberra today, and my superpower is my ancestors. So as Julie mentioned, my name is Michaela Jade, and I'm a Cabrogal woman from the Darug-speaking nations of the Sydney Basin, and we're connected to the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung peoples through songlines and waterways, and I thank my relatives for hosting me virtually on their country today. Together with my tribe, my team, my partners, Microsoft and Telstra, and my allies like Julie and Lucinda, we have created a technology that democratizes the production of augmented reality for all, especially First Peoples. We've anchored this technology in the edutech sector and deliver our pilot program in digital schools across Australia. We're doing this to not only proliferate our knowledge, language, and law, which has the highest extinction rate anywhere in the world. We're also doing this to prepare our peoples to contribute to the creation of the three-dimensional web. It exists, and before long, it will permeate our jobs, homes, and interactions with our natural world. And First Peoples cannot be absent from the version of this version of connection, understanding, and well-being. I love my job and my team and what we stand for, and could talk about it for hours. But today, I want to talk about something that involves everyone and what you might be here for today. Call to action to just do it, to give life to that idea, that vision you hold for a better future. If you don't know what that is, try imagining a better future for your relatives in 2170. This might be very difficult to do because 2020 has taken so much from all of us, and it's pulling hard at the threads of humanity to unravel. We're all in trying times, and it's easy to descend into dystopian thoughts, narrowing into the view of our undoing. And those who are the most hurt will probably say that we deserve it. I say we've been given a chance of a lifetime to pause, to reflect, and to meet the rest of the new decade with the healing our relatives, human and otherwise, have been calling for. We're prepared for this time because our ancestors never envisaged a world that they didn't prepare their descendants for. When situations out of their control were thrown upon them, like my ancestors, they had prepared our peoples with the skills, knowledge, and aptitude that we would need to survive. I'm here, strong in myself and my vision because of the work of my ancestors. I count myself very lucky as a 41-year-old woman that I get to hold the hand and heart of a 94-year-old man, my grandfather, who was able to hold the hand and heart of his father born in 1900, who held the hand and heart of his mother, the daughter of the last Cabrogal woman standing on the banks of the Georges River in Sydney, even after the institutionalisation, massacres and disease ravaged our peoples. He reminds me when things get tough about what he and my ancestors endured for me to stand here today. And knowing that I have 10,000 ancestors behind me gives me the courage and strength to do what Western cultures call innovation. I call it the continuation of our imagination towards a sustainable future, including technologies that have long been imagined and are now being built. My grandfather's advice became incredibly important to the rest of the tribe and I, this year as we fell to our knees on the 8th of January. Our cultural places burnt to the ground, and knowing we were the last generation to see those places our kin had so carefully looked after was unbearable. And our tangible culture of the Cabral became intangible in a matter of hours, and everything looked broken. Everything looked like a failure, and we felt like we had failed our ancestors. And for the first few months after we lost our places and objects in the bushfires, when I couldn't hide my anger and my hurt and my sorrow, my incredible friend and mentor, Lynette Walworth, who's an Emmy nominee and World Economic Forum Crystal Award winner this year, gave me some sound advice. She said, "It's easy to imagine a dystopian future because it stares us in the face. There are very few people in the world right now who can not just imagine a better future, but who can clearly see a path towards it. And it's the responsibility of those who can see it clearly to show the rest of us the way. Take your anger and your sorrow and your hurt and give it purpose by stepping into the space and showing us a different future." Her words awoke me, and the sense of failing my ancestors and my culture this year gave me the drive to get my work out of third gear. I'd been stuck and I'd been scared, and I hadn't been brave enough to grow my company. But after her words, I grew brave, and I asked for help, and I asked for money, and I asked people to join me by employing the people I wanted on my team, and they all said yes. And I bravely put an application into SheEO, and then 700 women invested in us. And I released our pilot technology before we were ready, and we had 80 schools in our inbox overnight. And 2 schools have been working with us since that point. 3 elders and 40 students believed in our first delivery and have become part of our Indigital family. They're helping us build out the program together because they believe in this future enough to help build it themselves. Just 8 months, in the year that is 2020, we've catapulted the vision forward at least 2 years by being brave and harnessing that sorrow and grief and power. We're not just waiting for 2021 and waiting for 2020 to run out. We're running towards it, not with spears, but with kulamons filled with determination and everything we will need for the journey. And my auntie once told me, times in your life are few where you truly get to have the scales removed from your eyes. Our peoples continue to call on everyone now, remove the scales. If you can't imagine a better future and see a clear path, just join those of us who can, because we need you to. Thank you.
Thanks, Mick. Glad you gave this forewarning, definitely chills. Given all the fires, the floods, the pandemic that has been thrown at us in the last nearly 12 months, it is a time to pause, reflect, and heal. And thanks to you, you have taught me a lot about the elders of this land who were the first scientists, innovators, and technologists. And everyone out there listening, please check out Indigital. I had an opportunity as a former classroom teacher to play with the tools, to play with the teachers, to learn more about the history. As an American woman, this is all very new to me, to be on this land and appreciative of it. So thank you for your story, Mick.
Thank you.
And thank you. And over to Christy Mansfield. So also a friend who has completed, an alumnus of Muru-D, our last company. So she's in the Muru-D portfolio, and a semifinalist also with SheEO. And same question, acknowledge the land that you're on, and what is your superpower? Over to you, Christy.
Thanks, Julie. I'm on beautiful Gadigal land today, and my superpower is really backing those people who have a vision for their community and for the change that they want to see in their community, really backing them with the tools and that they need to make better decisions in those communities. And I want to acknowledge and thank Mick for being so open and honest. My heart's really open right now, so maybe my talk will change now. I also thank Lucinda as well, who's a shining light in this space. I think all of us here today understand the importance of place-based decisions, and something that's very clear to me that many of our customers and users and people that we collaborate with all over Australia, particularly in low-income communities, often say no one's coming to save us, and it's really up to us as a community to take the reins and decide what's best for us and drive our people, resources and access to skills and information and funding to drive better outcomes for all, not just now, but the work we're doing, of course, as a collective, as all of us in communities, is contributing to a better future in the short and long term, as Michaela alluded to. So I'm very passionate about backing people on the ground to support them with their visions with data, because that's quite a big gap. Bridging the data divide is an important piece of work that we believe is our contribution to change in our society. We all know that large corporates and governments have easy access to data, but those people on the ground, such as Tyra here that you can see, who works in Bourke, and she's probably one of the few data analysts out in the west in New South Wales and what I would say around Bourke and the Darling River area for 400 k's, I reckon. She's one of the few data analysts, and so we're supporting people like her and her community in Maranuka and the broader community and tribal ancestors with easier access to data for decision making. So today what I want to talk about is very quickly a couple of stories about why this is important and how it's making a difference to people. So very quickly, Maranuka is it's the largest data-driven project in Australia. It's initiated by the Just Reinvest project, which is all around helping the community and the tribal council keep young kids out of the criminal justice system. And so essentially what we're doing here to support the community in Maranuka is bringing in multiple different data sets from many different contributors, whether it's the local police or local public school, local high school, not-for-profits, many service providers, family and community services, Department of Social Services, all those organisations that contribute to providing programs and funding to support keeping kids out of the justice system are contributing their private data. And this sounds really simple and an obvious idea. You know, everybody has information that they can share to ultimately help us all make better decisions and get a better outcome in our community. But this is a really, really difficult thing to do. We've so often up until now, and I think certainly COVID has changed the willingness for people to share data, because the pandemic has really provided people with insight into how much data can help with decision making, particularly public data and when data is open and available. So what is happening in our communities and in Bourke is that many different partners and allies are coming together with a willingness to share data. So what we do now, and this is quite groundbreaking and exciting, I think, for many communities around Australia, is that we're automating access from multiple different organisations and systems into our platform, which really lets people have immediate, instant access rather than question what's really going on in their community. And this is important for three reasons. The first is that when you have access to information that's relevant, you can make a better decision in the moment to decide how to support your community or young people in this case. Secondly, you can inform the community in many different places across your satellite towns and also your tribal councils and working groups, etc., who are all focused on the same effort. You can tell stories about what's really going on in your community to illuminate information for people who can then come together and make decisions together collaboratively. And I think that's really quite key. And the third thing, which is critical and exciting, is this notion of having the data to drive a policy agenda and a change. So ultimately, data can, from the grassroots up, particularly when shared, can really drive a new policy agenda that's going to improve place-based outcomes for all. So this is work we're doing in Maranuka. As I said, it's quite groundbreaking. We're starting to replicate this work across many Indigenous-led initiatives and communities and across many different collaborations. Another place which is very close to my heart is the Logan community. It's one of the largest place-based initiatives in Australia, more than 300,000 people, and it's a very, very large strategic place-based program of work. The work there that we're doing is doing machine learning modelling to improve access to quality early education and care for the community there. And the question that the Logan team and the collaboration had there is, do we actually have enough quality early education in our town to achieve the goals of school readiness for children 3.5 and 4? And so what we're showing here is the overall model of need there. We've modelled that based on quality, capacity, transportation, how far it is to travel. And you can see in the red spots there where there are hotspots of need. And what's happening right now is the team and the community in Logan are advocating to policymakers around, a change in the system that's going to ultimately improve outcomes for their kids, but also for their whole community more broadly. And it's a great example of two different data sets, open data sets coming together and using machine learning modelling to get a better picture of what is happening across Australia. And these are the kinds of things that we can do to improve decision making and give what I see is amazing pioneers doing incredible work on the ground, just more power in their conversations with policymakers and with others when they're able to see what's really needed in their community and advocate for that. And another one that I also adore, of course, and I love backing, as I said, the pioneers in our community. And this is in East Gippsland, and East Gippsland, of course, is a vast area. They've had a lot of impact from the bushfires, of course, and now, of course, the pandemic and other crises in the community. And here we are working with a collaboration of 5 organisations, service providers and grassroots organisations to bring in data to understand the well-being of children. And they're all sharing data across the platform. So ultimately, what I'm seeing is our ability to start to better understand vulnerabilities by state, by local suburbs, etc., through easier access to data, which improves the delivery of policy from different government agencies, federal, state and local, but also the philanthropic community. And more than that, it gives community people themselves better access to that information to give them more confidence as well as power in their decision making. For people who are interested, you can jump onto our website, seerdata.com.au, and play with the similarity model, which helps you identify communities most like yours, which is a really fun tool to identify perhaps, what's going on in similar communities around Australia and linking up to see the kinds of work that they're doing in terms of programming or service delivery that might improve your community. We really believe that there's no story without data and no data without story, and we're helping and working very hard to back these pioneers working to do the incredible change-making activity that they're doing on the ground. So thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Christy. I love that. There's no data without story and no story without data. I love it. I also love having watching you going out to these rural communities and helping them share in their data and whatnot. I always like to say, and Christy will hear this, data is cool, data is very powerful, but clean and organized data is sexy, which is something both Lucinda and Christy are doing with their platforms. And so I just want to point that out, that I get really inspired not only by these women as what they're leading, but the work that they are doing with data, with technology to change the world. So with that, I'm going to ask each of you. I know each of you we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals. I know each of you are working on at least one or addressing at least one. So given the goal or the Sustainable Development Goal that you are addressing, what does Australia or the world look like in 5 and or 20 years because you're in it? So I'm going to go with Lucinda first. You are on mute. The famous T-shirt.
Someone's got to do it, right?
Someone's got to do it.
There
all right,
everyone. Yeah, thanks. I think that's a really powerful question, and I think what I love about this network and the talks we have today, that these are all very powerfully moving us in a direction of positive social change. Neighborlytics really anchors itself in Goal 11, and that's a goal we're familiar with. I 10 years ago had a chance to help shape that goal. And one of the things that it really talks a lot about is access to opportunity in neighbourhoods locally, but particularly public space. But the way that Neighbourlytics looks at that in terms of what would the world look like is that we want to see that well-being is the central priority for place investment. And if that is to become the central priority, we need to be able to measure it, we need to be able to track it, we need to be able to understand which initiatives are shifting the dial and which ones aren't. And I'm sure Christy has a lot to play into that conversation as well. But that's what the world looks like for us, is that we're actually able to have the tools that we need to make wellbeing that central priority for place strategy and investment.
So with well-being, a happier world, happier communities, mentally and physically, and the nature as an attraction. Michaela, what for you? What do you see the world because of Indigital in it?
Yeah, so that's a really big question too. One we've been thinking about for a long time. So we like to think about what the world would be like in 2170 when around our 7th generation descendant will be walking on planet Earth. So I imagine a world where First Peoples are not only consuming technology, we're inventing it and building it and shaping it. And the thing that we're working on towards that at the moment is having visibility of our cultures represented in the three-dimensional internet. So this is the flat internet that we're on today. It's 2D. In the near future, you'll be walking around and you'll expect a digital layer to be on almost everything, and it will be in your home, and it will be around the national park, and it will be basically everywhere. You'll be able to get another dimension of information layered onto the real world, and we want our peoples to be visible in that world. And there's 400 million First Peoples around the world right now that don't have access to creating that kind of content in the future. So hopefully that changes.
Great. And which goals are you targeted at?
So we target 4, 8, and 11.
Which are?
Sorry, education, gender equality, and innovation.
Awesome. And the other thing, in short term, with your product, with your program, I'm hoping I can learn Minecraft or be taught Minecraft by some of the students in your class, and to be able to understand and learn the stories that you are telling. Christy, how about you? What's the world going to look like because Seer data and analytics is in it in the next 5 and or 20 years?
Well, as you know, open data is an enabler to all the SDGs. And so we're really passionate and committed to making data available to people who are working on the SDGs. So really, I see it very much as bringing open data together and making it accessible, making it usable, making it shareable, blendable with other data sets, so that, it's an enabler. It's almost like an infrastructure that I see, some of the highways to enable the programming for the SDGs. So I'm very excited about being part of a large global network of organisations and innovators in the civic tech space, bringing open data to life for this sort of decision making.
Right. Yeah. So better decision making. And I want to encourage the audience out there to continue to type in your questions that you have. My next question, I'm going to pivot a little bit. As this is the Innovation and Invention Festival, we have to recognize that failure is part of the journey. And because of failure, we learn a lot. So if you're not failing or learning, you're not growing and you're not making a difference. And we've all, the pandemic threw us one big, if that could be a failure or a learning. So what are some of your learnings or discoveries that you've experienced through your journey? Mick, can I ask you first?
You sure can. I think it's not a discovery. It's probably something that we've already known in the company for a long time, is that I think it's a bit of BS that you have to do this startup thing really, really quickly, and you have to burn through your capital and try all the things and fail with all the things before you can be considered a success. And we've taken our time because our people demand that of us. They demand that we take time with being very considerate about what we're building into the future and how that's linked to extractive industries. So all this computing technology comes from the ground, and that comes from the ground of Indigenous peoples mostly. So considering that all the way through to considering how we're going to decommission things is very important for us. So we like to take our time to think about what we're doing and to try it slowly and quietly and continue to grow along this journey. And I don't think you need to do it very rapidly and quickly and fail fast and all those things. Like, we failed tons of times in the company and it's only made us stronger every time. So I'm not really worried about it. And it kind of, if something works straight up, because I'm a scientist as well, if you do a science experiment, it works the first time, you're like, hang on a minute, what's going on there? So yeah, just trying to be reflective and yeah, it's part of it.
Great. Lucinda, do you have a learning story, flirting story?
Plenty. But I think the one that might be most relevant to this context is my, as many founders would, optimism to try new things can be unsettling for the people who like a little bit of control in our team. But the specific example is, I think what we've done a couple of times is, to your point of time mix, taken a product to market much too early. Now that's okay in terms of testing and learning, and we have learned from that. But the part that's really hard is convincing your customers that you're testing and learning when they're paying for something. And I feel that that's part of the failure learning journey that we need to accept, that if you're working with an early stage startup, if you're working with any kind of brand new technology, that there is a risk that things will break and that you'll need to fix them or it won't be perfect the first time, but that we're on a journey together. And yes, we might still ask you to pay for it, but at least there's an understanding of what we're trying to create here. And I think that's part of this puzzle that happened earlier this year in releasing a product too early, is really trying to understand and communicate better on the customer side as well.
Well, that feedback, that data is a gift. So it's a great learning experience. And Christy,
I really resonate with what Lucinda was just saying, because I think, in an emerging tech space, there's always this moment where you're not going to quite meet the expectation of customers as you're growing from startup to scale up, which is really where we're at. And the promise of easier access to data and data sharing and usability has been achieved in many respects, but now people want to go faster. They want to analyze more. They want to improve charting. They need to reporting, and then I suppose it is that conversation with customers, as Lucinda was saying, which is, we're in partnership with you, we're committed, but certainly at those points in time, in that. As Gartner talks about, it's the trough of disillusion, where you have to really, work really hard to meet the promise before opening up and growing fast. And I think that's to Mick's point, make sure you're meeting the vision and the promise before going too hard, in order to not disappoint people, because what we are bringing in is important.
Yeah. So it builds your resilience as well. So hearing from the upset customers or a pandemic or having to pivot, it's great to see all that resilience. So while we have asked the 1,000 people that are on this call watching you to ask you a question, I'm going to open this space for you to ask the question, that any ask that you have that you need help with. And I'm going to start with Christy for this one. Do you have an ask? Oh,
yeah. So anyone who would like to access open data can jump onto seerdata.com.au and sign up for free. We made Seer Standard, which is our open data library and analytics tools, available to anybody. You can also look at vulnerability indexes and data sets that we've built for COVID in that. And so jump on and see if you can learn something about your community.
Great. Awesome. Mick, what is your big ask?
My big ask is, if you have school kids or you have a relationship with a school or you are connected to a school in your local community, they jump on to our website, indigital.net.au or indigitalschools.com, and they register to hear from us about teaching cultural skills through digital skills in your local school. And I do have a cheeky second ask, Julie, that everyone just cuts themselves some slack for the rest of the year and realize that you can't be everything to everyone all the time, and that's totally okay.
That's a very excellent ask. Thank you very much. And just backing on our last question, you had the by opening up your list to get people to sign up, you had what happened?
Yeah, we accidentally launched and we got 80 scores in our inbox, and I think there's around 120 now, which is fantastic. And we're just taking our time to get in touch with everyone and I guess build a pipeline. So while we can't come out to the school right away, we're really, really interested in who would like to work with us in 2021.
Great. Yeah. So you have a great pipeline and figuring out how to handle all of that. So it's a wonderful problem to have. And Lucinda, what is your big ask?
Thanks. I'm just trying to work out if I hear that Mix just said she accidentally launched, because that sort of sounds like something that a good entrepreneur would do. I have two asks as well, actually, and they're a little bit similar to the group. We are launching the SaaS version of our product in November. Currently, it's on demand, and we would love people to be beta testers and break things for us so that we know about it. So if that's you'd like to play with Neighbourlytics data, we'd be interested to speak to you about that. But the other thing that I wrote down just in thinking about this today is just to be kind, I think, to ourselves and to others. And I just think acknowledging the environment that we're in is really tough. And I think whether it's watching the bushfires in the Bay Area, whether it's like remembering the bushfires that we so recently had and are heading into again, and then, the various layers of COVID-19 impacts, I think to bear that in mind in all the conversations with that kind of kindness is really what I hope for our world coming out of this and what I hope that we can do right now.
Great. So I asked this question in a little bit of the midpoint of our question and answer time. You can still ask more at the end, which is a muscle that I really do hope we all learn to strengthen in doing that ask, because this is the time we really need it. So some of you have shared a little bit of stories. I do love stories. And if you can share any detailed, inspiring story of how your technology has made a positive impact in the lives of your users, your customers, your communities, due to whether it's a pivot or some classes that you've provided. I was able to sit in again on Mix training with teachers, and I love watching their eyes light up when this is so cool. So I'm going to go over to Mick first. If you have any stories of a child or teachers that you've received this glorious light bulb moment.
Yes, I did. So we made a hologram of a character called Namande, who's a figure from the Kakadu landscape, in conjunction with Neville Namanyok, who's a dear friend and senior traditional artist in Kakadu. And the hologram was cool. He put the HoloLens on his head and was able to see the hologram and was excited by that, and was like really excited that it was a scary hologram, because that's what it's supposed to be, and we hadn't sanitized the culture in the way that we portrayed it. But the best part of it, and the kind of the earth-moving part, was him with the HoloLens on and then taking it off and putting it on his daughter's head, Yanmalu, who was 4 years old, and her being able to see the hologram. And then her taking that device off her head and asking her daddy about the Namande. And then they sat for 20 minutes sharing culture in the old way. And that is what made me keep going.
Awesome. Lucinda, do you have any stories of these aha moments with the power of your data and or the communities?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of, I'll just share a small story as an example of many, but something that I love and am continually surprised by when we look at this kind of real-time digital data is that it completely demystifies what we think places are, because we look at them and we see a physical environment and we make all of these assumptions about who lives there and what kinds of place it actually is. But when you look at the behavior and the stories, it reveals often a completely kind of different type of place. And one example of that has been working in Greenfield or suburbs very much on the edge of Sydney and Melbourne, and can be an assumption, stereotype, I think, about what kind of neighbourhoods these might be, commuter suburbs, dormitory suburbs. And one thing that the digital data revealed, and this is a few years ago, was that there was just a huge density of home-based businesses. And the development strategy so far had been very much oriented around young families, and all of the programming had been around like parents groups and childcare centres, which are also very needed in that place. But what the developer did in looking at this data is instead started running business meetups and co-working spaces, because they realised that this was actually a business community. And it wasn't like particularly, the stereotype of women at home. It was actually women working at home. And so this really shifted the dial on what kind of strategies they used to invest in, but also revealing the neighbourhood life there. And there are many, many sort of small stories of that, about getting a more complete picture of what a neighbourhood is, that really inspires me and excites me.
Amazing. And I know Christy has a story of her technology has made someone cry tears of joy. So I don't know if that's your story, but if you do have one.
I have one like that. Yes, I have a few like that. But certainly, data is really important for organisations to be able to report back on the impact they're making, of course. And, for people who are working at the grassroots and are doing, the face-to-face work with people who are really in need, the headache of data and reporting can be very overwhelming for people. So in the community, one of the communities where we've been working for a little while now, Mount Druitt, yes, we did show how easy it was to just create analytics, to do reporting, and indeed people cried to say, oh, you're going to make my life so much easier. And, I think that's the beauty of technology. If we're able to allow people to work more with people and create meaningful connections and do the work that's really needed in the community and take away that heavy lifting and those headaches and the overwhelm, then that's of benefit to all society.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but some of those headaches are time and money that you have removed.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I do have some questions coming in from the audience. From Tim. Question is, and I'm going to direct this to Lucinda first, how permanent is some of the behavior we are seeing during COVID-19?
In one way, that's anyone's guess. But what I do think is that it has confirmed things or accelerated trends that were already underway. And those things I think we are likely to see more of. So I wouldn't necessarily say work from home, because I hate working from home personally. But I would say the idea of working from anywhere is very powerful. And if you can genuinely work from anywhere, then that actually shifts the way that we need to create places. And it means where you might choose to live is going to be much less around being proximate to your work, but much more around where you want to live, which could be any number of places. So I think that idea of more online collaborative work is likely to have a profound impact, from how many freeways we need through to where we choose to live. And I think that is something that was already underway, but COVID has kind of just made it happen, because there was always these barriers of, it's probably a bit too hard. And we're like, well, actually, we can do it if we need to. But there are many other shifts that I really hope will recover and bounce back. We look at creative industries and other things like that, enormous innovation in the way that people are pivoting, particularly creative artists and industries are pivoting to create new experiences, but still being creative. So I think we'll see more of those things, but perhaps in a different shape.
Okay. And I will pause if Mick or Christy want to add anything. Okay. From Peter, how expensive is this kind of data? I'm a small business, so is it viable for me? Christy, I'll go down to you for this one.
Peter, if it's access to open data, then our platform is free. So you can get started fairly quickly if you have time and interest to understand local context. Open data is really good to understand context. and to also identify other places where you might be interested in expanding. But you can jump on, and if you'd like some help, just jump on and set up a meeting with one of our data strategy advisors, and we can help.
And Lucinda?
Neighbourlytics probably would be expensive for a single business owner, but the way that it works best, because we look at neighbourhood scale and trends across the neighbourhood, is we often work with Main Streets associations or business improvement districts or some like local associations who then can make the data accessible and available to everyone in the network and understand that economic ecosystem. I mean, I'm not sure how small your small business is, but our pricing's on our website if you want to see whether that fits in your kind of range. But you can be a free beta tester as well.
Okay, the next one, this is from Lauren. It's going to be directed at Mick, but I know that both of you can answer this one. Many Indigenous communities have been working to make themselves part of the information society. What still needs to be done to encourage dialogue, collaboration, and information sharing? How can industry address or support closing this divide?
Yeah, closing the divide. Yeah, this has become really pertinent and something that I recommend to tech companies that ask to work with us is to make sure that you're employing First Peoples and peoples of colour and peoples from diverse backgrounds, because often there are companies that come to us, for example, and say, oh, we realise we don't work with Indigenous people, we work with us, which is great, but it's always better if you can employ someone to work in your company and let them help shape some of your ambitions to reach out to communities and work with them. In saying that, if you don't have space to employ people, working with our people collaboratively is the next best option. I think it's important, and we do this with all our work, is to definitely co-design projects together rather than develop something for other nations of people. That tends to not work. So if you are wanting to work with our people, it's always together that we do it.
Okay, and pause again if Christy or Lucinda want to answer. Okay, we have time probably for one more question. Julie writes, I love that expression, remove the scales to make a better path. Do you think having so much information on our behaviors, needs, and gaps will bring a brighter future? Lucinda?
Yeah, I do. And data is never, you have to have action from data as well, right? So I see data as providing visibility. And right now, if we are making, I'm particularly talking about it in the cities and infrastructure context, but millions, billion-dollar decisions without any real context around culture and community, then we're really doing our places a gross disservice. So behavioural data provides us a lot of insight to be more appropriate, sensitive, inclusive in the way that we create places. But ultimately, it's really about the actions that we take from that. But I do believe, it's for your question, that the more visibility that we have on multiple layers of what's going on, the better decisions that we're able to make.
Pause for Christy or Mick. You want to answer? Because otherwise, I will wrap it up.
I was just going to say, I think information comes in a variety of forms as well. So, I see people profoundly shift their entire lives once they understand the story of the place where they live and work through the lens of a first person. So it doesn't necessarily have to come in ones and zeros for it to have impact.
Great. Thank you. So thank you all for joining us from as far as Greece to as close as Sydney and down in Melbourne. So thank you for joining us for driving healthy economic and social outcomes through digital technologies here at the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. That's all we have time for. Thank you to our panelists. I encourage you to go visit their websites and reach out to them on socials, check out what they're doing. Lucinda Hartley from Neighborlytics, Michaela Jade from Indigital, and Christy Mansfield from Seer Data and Analytics. We also thank our session sponsor, Telstra. Thank you again for joining us from the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. Bye-bye.